Hello, everyone. My name's Emily Stafford, and thank you for listening to the Bugging Out podcast. This podcast is about insects and things bug-related. I'm making this podcast as part of a semester-long project that focuses on Fauquier County, specifically land use in Fauquier County. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about how land use in Fauquier County affects bugs. Joined with me throughout the podcast is Jim McNeil. Jim, would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name is Jim McNeil. I'm an associate professor, term associate professor at the Smithsonian-Mason School of Conservation. And I have taught for the Smithsonian-Mason semesters for going on 10 years now. But my background is as an entomologist, and I got my undergraduate degree from Cornell in entomology and my PhD in entomology from Penn State University.
In the first 3 episodes of this podcast, I will be talking about what insects are, why they're important, and how they're under threat and what we can do about it. So to start off, what is a bug? And more specifically, what's an insect? And insects are part of the animal kingdom, and they're part of a larger group called the arthropoda, which also includes non-insects like crabs and roly-polies and spiders. However, insects are unique from other species in this group because they possess a 3-segment body with 6 legs, and for the most part, they have wings. So then what's the difference between an insect and a bug? Well, in entomology terms, or the study of insects, a bug is an insect with mouthparts that are evolved to pierce and suck, like a mosquito. But most people know bugs as any sort of insect, spider, or small creepy crawler. So technically, a bug is a type of insect. So now that we know the difference between a bug and an insect, where do they live? The short answer to that question is everywhere. They live in the grass, like grasshoppers. They live underground, like ants. They can live in trees, such as the walking stick, or on flowers, like the assassin bug. Sometimes they even live underwater, such as the underwater beetle, the water penny. And some insects even build their own homes, like carpenter bees or honeybees. And insects can be found all over the world, all over the place. So is it any wonder that insects play a major role in the environment and our lives? But what is it about insects that make them so important? Well, it's really more what the insects do that are important to us. Insects provide us with what we call ecosystem services, which are services that an ecosystem provides for humans and other species for free. Examples of this include pollination, natural pest control, and nutrient cycling. So, Jim, could you tell us what some of the ecosystem services that insects provide and how that benefits us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of ecosystem services, the first one that comes to mind, I think for most people, is probably pollination. That's where the food, so much of our food comes from, is from direct pollination of bees, but also flies and butterflies, and there's all sorts of different kinds of bees. So everybody thinks of honeybees and bumblebees, the big visible ones, but there's all solitary bees too.
In 2012, it was estimated that in the US alone, direct pollination by insects was worth $30 billion US. And it's not just the honeybees that do the pollinating, it's also the flies, butterflies, moths, and beetles. Insects are also important to the food chain as they serve as food sources for many other species like birds, bats, frogs, and other bugs.
So another one I think that maybe people don't see or think about a whole lot, but is really important, is actually decomposition. That for a lot of animals, a lot of vegetable matter and things that die or are left in the environment, insects are the main or the one of the primary decomposers for it. So we think about like vultures and big animals like that being useful for cleaning up things like that, and they certainly are. But once again, the majority of that work is actually done by insects. So there's this whole suite that that their life is breaking down dead and decomposing material, and without that we would have a lot of mess on our hands.
So, obviously, insects are very important to us, but what would happen if there weren't any insects at all? Well, in early 2020, a series of studies on insect populations found that this might be the case in the future. They found that land living insects have decreased by 25% over the past 30 years. This is a drastic decline in insect population. Well, remember when I said that in 2012, pollination by insects was worth $30 billion? Well, if we didn't have any insects, we would need to spend a lot of money to replace the services those insects provided. You would need to spend money on researching the solution, developing the technology, and funding people to carry it out.
There's a great series of pictures that they took in a Whole Foods actually a couple of years ago. It's pretty classic
Mm.
online, of the um, like the produce department, of what it would look like,
Mhm.
what now with all the various crops and things like that, and then what it would look like if we didn't have. They were focusing on bees, but insect pollination in general, and it's striking how empty that section is. I mean, there are definitely things that we could still eat, but yeah, most of our fruit, most of the interesting vegetables, things like that.
Without insects, the food chain would also become unbalanced because many other species would be without a food source, and that would vastly change the ecosystems around us. But do we really have to worry about losing all of our insects? In early 2020, a series of studies on insect populations found that land living insects have decreased by 25% over the past 30 years. This is a huge decrease in insect population. I remember living in Fauquier as a kid, I used to have to sweep June bugs off the front porch, but now I'm lucky if I see maybe 10. So Jim, as an entomologist, have you seen this trend as well? What's the insect population status like in Virginia? What changes have you seen or experienced?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And anecdotally, I've seen evidence of those declines too. And like you say, it's kind of one of those things you don't realize it's there until you like actually think about what it
Mhm.
used to be like. And like it's a simple thing, but one of the things that I've noticed is driving around, I don't get nearly as many insects on my windshield as I used to. So like I can remember as an undergraduate, I would be driving back and forth to my parents' house in upstate New York, and I'd cross over several streams, creeks, rivers, and everything on the way. And it was pretty much a given in the spring that there was going to be a cloud of mayflies over that
Yeah.
on the road. And the because a couple of years ago was making a similar trip and realized that my windshield was essentially clear. There wasn't anything on it. And yeah, definitely, it's sort of like the contrast that you notice.
This may be the future we're facing if action isn't taken soon. But fortunately, there are things we can do to help the insect. In the next episode of Bugging Out, I'm going to talk about why insect populations are declining, what land use is, and how it impacts insects, and what we can do to help. Thanks for listening.